My name is Ken Stuczynski, and I eat food. My story is probably the same as many of you. When I was little, food appeared on my plate 3 times a day. It came from a can or a box or a bag from the kitchen cupboards. It was only when I was older that I realized where food really comes from. The supermarket. So it was of no surprise to me that if we wanted to give to the poor, you simply put a can in a bag or a box. Lima beans, right? Like the supermarket represented some magical place where food comes from, the box represented the mythical race known as the needy. I grew up in the suburbs. I lived in a comfort zone where food appeared and disappeared, and none of it was of consequence to me or the people around me. As I got older, part of me knew this wasn't quite right. So I made the first of 2 choices in my life I will never regret. The first choice was in my 20s as a religious education teacher. I decided to take my confirmation students, high school sophomores and juniors, to the St. Vincent de Paul dining room on Main Street in Buffalo. Strangely, nothing like this had ever been done before in the parish. Some of these kids had never even been to the city, a mere 6 miles away. And one of my students, a class clown, but not a bad kid, was silent the whole way back. Afterward he said, very seriously, almost in tears, "I didn't expect to see children." Maybe it's because we never had children-sized donation boxes in the vestibule. The point is that for these kids, hunger was never again defined by a television commercial or a fundraiser for people thousands of miles away they'd never meet. They saw beyond the box to be face-to-face with real people, human beings just like them. The second decision was a more personal one. In 2002, times were tough. I was a new business owner, and after 9/11, companies stopped spending money overall. We lived within our means, but a few more food dollars could have went a long way. My wife and I even applied for food stamps, and then withdrew our application after we realized that would require us to accept all sorts of other programs we didn't need, and even counseling for things that didn't apply to us. It was an all-or-nothing sort of dependency, and we chose nothing. What I did do is connect with a farm I found out about through one of my Tai Chi students. Buffalo Organics, now known as Native Offerings Farm, was a family-oriented, community-supported agriculture project, or CSA. This means you purchase a food subscription from their harvest, picking up a weekly share over most of the year. We chose the option of me working on the farm 1 day a week in exchange for our share, which more than fed us. I needed the exercise and couldn't afford a gym, and we talked about having a farm of our own someday. I may as well know for sure if I'd enjoy the work and lifestyle ahead of time. So here I was, doing all that in the fresh air and bringing home more food than my wife could freeze and can for the winter. A CSA is a business model, for sure, but is founded in the philosophy that I learned from Stu Ritchie, the father of the family who owns the farm. People need to be connected to their food source. He wanted people to know where their food comes from. It isn't something that appears magically from a replicator on Star Trek or the other side of a counter at a restaurant. It was touched and nurtured by Mother Nature and human hands. And it reminded me of how little we are connected to what is real, the earth itself and our fellow man. Maybe it's because our society is so comparatively prosperous and technologically advanced, and our bureaucratic tendencies are epic in proportion to actual benefits. The result has been that we live almost entirely a life of abstraction. We are sheltered, or shelter ourselves rather, from the reality of both our natural environment and human needs. In simpler times, there were simpler solutions. In my grandparents' living room years ago, and now in my own, are a pair of paintings. The Angelus depicts field workers pausing for prayer during the workday. The Gleaners tells the reality of the artist's time and many centuries before that. Poor women and children had the right to glean the fields for whatever leftover crops they could gather for themselves after the harvest. Jean-François Millet painted these in the late 1850s, long before the birth of anyone now living. In September 2010, and again in July 2011, we did exactly that. In exchange for the labors of a few volunteers for a few hours, we filled our cars with fresh organic produce, some of which would have been left in the fields unharvested. The farmer, the Ritchies in this case, got a few extra chores done and can claim a donation on their taxes. We brought it to the Friends of Night People, where we prepared what we could integrate into the evening meal and stored the rest for their future use. Both nights we served between 1 and 200 men, women, and children. There were no lima beans. There was no box. It was food worthy of the effort and dignity of human beings. It was a long day of work, and there were no complaints, only satisfaction and smiles. In countries where hunger is a much more serious problem, we have ignored the fact that generations of aid from wealthier countries have not changed the fundamental conditions of hunger. Food is not being grown where it can be, not getting to the people who need it, and is even used as a weapon of war and genocide. At best, it's a tax write-off and anti-guilt pill for the haves, precarious hope of survival for the have-nots. What is turning the tide, virtually eliminating widespread hunger community by community in places around the world, are programs that do not just give out food, but secure an infrastructure that feeds people even in yearly droughts and disrupted governments. Local food banks, local supply requirements for school food programs, guaranteed markets for small farmers. So what we are trying to do here is of no less consequence than global actions. Geographic distance is irrelevant. Scale is irrelevant. What we have the opportunity to do here is what can simply be done, and it is enough to bring awareness and change to the relationship in our own community between the earth, food, and the hungry. The program. The action plan is simple. Volunteers work with local farmers in exchange for food that can then be served to the needy. The strategy is simple. Establish relationships with farmers, soup kitchens, and groups of volunteers, such as churches or schools, where students or parishioners are looking for community service hours. The model is simple. No one owns the program, and it can be borrowed and replicated by anyone, anywhere, with groups of people coordinated through anyone willing to do the work. And the politics are simple. This is a fully volunteer-oriented process, and no money exchanges hands, with people pitching in with transportation costs as they see fit. No budget, no monetary disbursements, no taxpayer money or corporate obligations. What are left are challenges. I stand here today, a single person with a few contacts and committed volunteers. The program has been successfully piloted, the plan made public, and a social media presence that I am willing, as a professional web developer, to devote my own professional resources to. What is needed the most are people who have contacts or are willing to make contacts to fill it in a database of farms, kitchens, and volunteer groups and individuals. In particular, we're having trouble finding places that serve the needy late enough in the day to glean and transport produce beforehand. We could do it on separate days or simply drop off the food at a pantry for later use. However, that is not the full point of the program. The primary purpose is to create an end-to-end volunteer experience that puts us deeply in touch with the reality of need. This is an act of mercy, not the difference at a distance that breeds complacency of conscience. The intention is to transform those making the sacrifice of time and effort, forever changed as more compassionate human beings. Donations and volunteering are things of the moment. We are looking for a new way to approach hunger, and thus a sustained spiritual change in ourselves. There are many programs that do the former, which is by no means unimportant, but the integrity of this program depends on the broader view, working as an integrated local community rather than the usual shifting of dollars and hours. The way I see it, there is no excuse for hunger, not where we live and not in the bigger world. The only thing left is to decide if we're going to take responsibility as individuals and as a community. And this, I pray, will be an immediate yet long-term solution.